Waterhenge. Fiona Elfenbein. News. Right, here's the bit to watch in the Strait of Hormuz. Reuters reports that Iran and Oman have reached an understanding on the geographic coordinates of a proposed shipping route through the strait, with a joint announcement being prepared. But significant details are still being negotiated. And here's the important bit. Reuters says the proposed arrangement would give Tehran control over ships entering the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is also seeking transit fees, although those remain disputed and the shipping industry is already raising legal, sanctions and insurance objections. Now put that beside something else. The United States already had more than 50,000 military personnel in the Middle East when additional Marines and sailors were ordered into the region in March. Reuters also reported that Washington was examining military options involving the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's Karg Island. And Karg isn't some random little island. It's Iran's major oil export hub. President Trump has openly said he wants to take it over, while the United States has already struck military targets there. There is still no public evidence of a decision to launch a full-scale ground invasion of Iran. But history tells us something about ground wars. Before Desert Storm, the United States and its allies spent about 5 months building forces in Saudi Arabia. More than 500,000 American troops eventually deployed there, and an official Defense Department history records that more than 85% of U.S. materiel, ammunition and support equipment was transported by sea. For Afghanistan was a different proposition. American Special Forces and Air Power were working alongside the Northern Alliance, which was already fighting the Taliban on the ground. So nobody here is saying America has decided to invade Iran. But if you're sitting in Tehran planning for the worst possible case, you'd be rather daft not to think about it. And that brings us back to those ships coming in. Waterhenge analysis. Right, news bit over. Now here's what we think may be going on. Wars don't run on blokes in uniforms alone. You can fly people around the world rather quickly, but an army needs vehicles, ammunition, fuel, communications, engineering gear, spare parts, and enough supplies to keep the whole thing moving. And history gives us a rather useful clue. When America built the force for Desert Storm, most of that materiel came by sea. Defense Historical Office. So imagine you're an Iranian military planner. You don't know whether Washington intends a ground invasion. You don't know whether it might try something smaller, an island, an oil terminal, a coastal position. And you certainly don't assume that because somebody says there'll be no invasion today, there can't be one later. So what would worry you? Not necessarily the tanker carrying crude out of the Gulf. You'd be watching the cargo coming in. Because troops arriving later are one thing. Heavy equipment already positioned somewhere in the Gulf is another. And if there were ever a ceasefire or a quiet spell before another escalation, an Iranian planner would have to consider whether equipment could be brought into the region aboard ordinary commercial shipping, stored, pre-positioned, or kept afloat until required. We have no evidence that America is doing that. That's important. We're saying Iran has a military reason to make sure it couldn't be done without Iran noticing, which suddenly makes this proposed Hormuz arrangement rather more interesting. Iran says it wants fees. Maybe it does. But Waterhenge's question is much simpler. If this was mainly about collecting money, why is control of the incoming lanes so important? Perhaps because Tehran isn't nearly as interested in what you're taking out of the Persian Gulf as it is in what you might be bringing in. There you are. Everyone's staring at the oil tankers going out. Iran may be watching the delivery vans coming in.